This is episode number 13 of Office Hours, so welcome. Come on into my proverbial office. If this is your first episode of Office Hours, you have to fight. No, that's not how that goes. Office Hours is essentially a call-in advice show for game masters everywhere. So whatever game you're playing, whatever role-playing quandaries you may have, you can submit them to me on my website, www.adam-koval.com/office-hours, and I will answer them for you. We do a grab bag. We do 3 questions every episode, and I try to talk a little bit about both the specifics of the question and how it might apply to role-playing generally. So, yeah. Last episode, we did a bunch of very feelsy questions. We had some questions about player dynamics and about PvP, and that was like fun and stuff. And we're going to do a little bit more of that, but I've got a very specific game-related question smack in the middle of this one. Y'all feed me some very good questions. There was one, so this is the first episode. This is the first episode where I wanted to answer a question, but even with the time between episodes, I was like, gosh, I need more time to answer this. So there's an episode that's going to have a question out of order because I'm still working on how to succinctly answer it. But today's questions, these ones I can answer. So we're going to start with a question from someone who is feeling some tension about getting started. So for all you brand new GMs.
Hey Adam, my name is November and I am an aspiring GM. I say aspiring because I actually have not run a single game yet, but I've been wanting to give it a try ever since being a player for the first time and seeing your, in my opinion, masterful work on Swansong. Now, I've been struggling with getting past the initial barrier of, oh god, what am I doing? How do I thing? This is terrifying. So, my question to you was this. What tips, tricks, and general advice do you have for a first-time GM that can help them get past that initial barrier of fear and, perhaps more importantly, learn from the experience and grow as a GM? Thank you so much for doing the show.
Well, you're welcome, November. You were named after the best month around. So, I love the way that November phrased this. Oh God, how do I thing? And that feeling of like, oh God, what am I going to do? I have to GM. The sense that you're unprepared or you're unready to sit your butt in the GM seat. This is not a feeling that is exclusive to those who have never GM'd before. I mean, I still have sessions where I feel like I'm not ready to run the game. I'm not prepped enough, not thinking quickly enough today. I'm going to do a terrible job. Even after 20 years of playing role-playing games, I still get GM stage fright like crazy. Like, GM stage fright is like a for reals thing. I feel that. I mean, fuck it, I'm anxious about a game I have to run tonight. Right? I'm running a game in 3 hours, and I don't feel ready. But you can't let that stop you, right? Like, a little nervous tension can be a real good motivator to ready up for the game. So we'll talk a little bit about some ways that we might be struggling with that fear barrier, whether we're brand new to GMing, whether we're GMing pros, and how we can help ourselves get over the barrier, or at least, brace ourselves for a Kool-Aid Man style impact with the barrier so we can come out the other side being in one piece and, have a successful game experience. So commonly, I think folks feel like they're not ready for a game because of a lot of reasons, but we'll try to touch on them a little bit and address each one with a little bit of advice, because I don't think that there's any one specific kind of approach to this, right? You're all different, so we'll cover a bunch of stuff. So the question here is specifically about struggling with inexperience, that whole I've never done this before, fear of the new. So we'll start there, but a lot of this can be applied if you're just having feelings about a new campaign or a new episode of a campaign. So the anxiety of taking on the role of GM for the first time can come from this service-oriented idea that you're there to do a job for your players, right? There's rhetoric in a lot of game books about that very thing, about providing a service to your players, about being responsible for the fun at the table. And depending on the game that you're playing, the text might have you set up to expect that the whole game's success, everybody's fun, is on your shoulders. Now, we can combat the anxiety that these games can sometimes put in us by reminding ourselves that we're playing games with other human beings, and we can reach out to those people to support us in our endeavor, right? The easiest thing you can do, the first thing that you can do to help alleviate that stress is to say to your friends you are playing with, and just say to them, I'm having some anxiety about the game, feeling really nervous, haven't done this before. Sometimes just admitting it is enough to get you started, right? So sometimes when you say that, people will give you feedback like, oh, don't worry about it, or it's cool, we'll just take it easy, we'll help you out with the rules, or hey, I've never played this game either, I'm feeling kind of nervous too. You're all playing on the same team together, and you're playing the game for the same reasons, right? You all want to have a good time and enjoy a narrative and explore the mechanics of a game. And everyone at the table has a job. And as the GM, you've got a different job than everybody else, but it's not like it's a bigger deal or bears more responsibility than anybody else's job, right? Now, first-time GM anxiety can occur around a lack of experience with the rules, too, because it can be very uncomfortable if you're the one forced to make decisions about how to interpret the rules for everyone else. And the GM is often in this position. So, for example, interpreting the rules of whether you should be giving a +2 or +4 bonus. What obstacle should this be? Are you triggering Defy Danger or Hack and Slash? That kind of thing often falls on the GM. And if you don't have expertise, on the rule set, you can feel like you're not in a position of authority to make those calls. And you can turn that authority over to people who know better about the rules, right? You can say, I think this is ob 3. Does that sound about right? And you got to trust your players not to be like, no, it's ob 2. It's ob 1. You should definitely ob 1 that, right? You can trust your players. If you can't, if you feel like they're manipulating your lack of experience, they're probably dirtbags to begin with, and you maybe don't want to play with those people anyway, right? You can combat this lack of experience by reading the rules. Hopefully, if you've had experience trying to learn or memorize things before, so learning rules is something that I think a lot of people that have had a formal education tend to take too easily because, a textbook and an RPG rulebook are pretty similar in a lot of ways. So for me, coming from having some experience in university, I will read a rule book for the first time, and I will make notes about how the rules work, how they interact. I'll kind of short form it as I go. I'll highlight PDFs, make notes on those. It's an experience of internalizing the rules for me. Now, you might have different memorization tools, but keep in mind that however you get to that point, however you memorize these things, however you get around that stuff, games can be very different at the table than they are on paper. In fact, I would argue, I would say that in my experience, most of the role-playing games that I've read didn't completely make sense to me until we hit the table, right? So once that happened, once I saw it in play, it allowed me to sort of reinterpret the rules. So don't worry about getting it perfect every time, first time. Consider the first few sessions with a new rule set to be an experiment. Set aside a couple of pages in your GM notebook at the beginning of your campaign section to make notes about the rules that didn't do what you expected them to do in play, or where you couldn't figure out the rule for something and had to make a call, right? Being able to record what call you made and decide whether you made it correctly or not later is very helpful. You can always go back and work these things out. If you prioritize forward momentum in a game above anything else, if you really want to focus on the narrative and you really want to push the game forward and not get hung up on checking every rule at the table, just make a call, make a note in the book, and come back to it after you played, right? Come back to it and look at it and check the rules. And I'm training you, and by you I mean the audience, people who watch the shows that I GM. I've trained you to do this. I don't want to say for me, but lots of you know the rules of games in a way that I don't. Especially with the Star Wars games we've been playing, I don't have a ton of at-the-table experience with them. So I've trained you to send me notes, in the Reddit threads or on Twitter about the rules that I might have misinterpreted with page numbers so that I can later use you as my notebook to go back and check on this stuff. And you can assign a player to do this. You can have a more experienced player making notes and go back and change it, because every session you have a new opportunity to play the game as written, play them correctly. And it's hugely helpful. Like I'm so thankful that I have a living notebook of, hundreds of people. So it's really cool. It's very helpful for me. So that's fine, right? Like you don't have to worry about getting the rules perfect right off the bat. Most games rely on the GM to provide scenario content for their games, right? Situation, scenario. It can be really daunting to run a game for the first time when you have to come to the table with an opening gambit, right? To say, this is the game that I think we should play, and here's how much I've created for it, right? You might spend a lot of time brainstorming every possible thing that the PCs might do when you're presenting them with the scenario or the situation, the challenges in front of them, but you can never fully know. Like, you can do all the prep in the world, but you'll never be 100% prepared. I promise you get caught off guard, like, at least once. And that's okay, right? You prep to create a space that's comfortable for you, but look at your prep not as strictly content for the game, but like warm-up space for your brain. You can create encounters, you can create intriguing NPCs, you can do all of this stuff, and it might never see the light of day, but you can always reuse them later, and at the very least, they've given you an opportunity to go through the rules of creating NPCs or building encounters, right? Giving you a chance to percolate over the kind of stuff you're interested in the rules. And if feeling unprepared is a big problem for you, if you really feel like hesitant about that, start off with a published adventure. Honestly, like I don't use them because I tend to fly by the seat of my pants, but they have a lot of value for certain types of games. If you want to see, this is going to be some like very concrete advice. If you want to see published adventures that do an awesome job creating both concrete shit you can use and also a world that's interesting to play around in, check out the adventures published by Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? Goodman Games, Dungeon Crawl Classics. Every single one of those adventures is a fantastic way to experience that game. You could play a whole campaign with those and still have it feel like very much a personal game narrative for you. Chock full of good stuff. I'm not anti-scenario. I'm not anti-adventure by any means. Go check those out. And again, like, take this stuff back to your group between sessions. And not just your group, but other groups, right? Having a peer group, a support group of other GMs who are not part of your games to talk to between sessions is super helpful. Thank God for the internet, right? Like, you can make a list of your favorite GMs on Twitter and you can ask them about stuff. You can join Google Plus communities, whatever social venue you prefer on the internet. I mean, there's probably not like a GM support group on Grindr, but you know what I mean. Visit with other GMs, talk about their experience, do what you're doing here. For me, personally, anxiety about GMing comes from the worry that I don't have enough stuff for a 4-hour session. I worry that the things that I want to highlight in a session will be boring. The players will just gloss over them. I feel like I worry about players taking the bait when I'm interested in something. I worry that I'm going to forget an important rule, mess up the narrative, or like heavily delay the game because I can't remember a rule. And for me, in practice, most of this stuff's not a problem, right? I tend to overthink things, and in the end, the content that I make tends to drag out, if anything, right? I'll create what I think is going to be 4 hours, and we end up with 10 hours. And literally, at the end of every session I think I've ever played, I come out of those games feeling silly that I was ever stressed at all. And every week I still feel stressed about GMing. It's part of the game, and I've learned to make it something that motivates me, and hopefully that's something that you can do too. Keep in mind, you know your own brain best, and you know the kinds of things that help you get through anxiety-inducing situations, right? You're probably a human being, or maybe you're a gnome or an artificial intelligence. I'm not going to judge, but I can't help you if you're either of those things because that's so far out of my experience. But you probably struggle with like regular old human stuff like depression or social anxiety, or you have some neurodiversity stuff going on that means that you need to build your own tools for decomplicating your experience as the GM. And it's okay. That's totally okay. And you can still be a GM. And in fact, all the little things that make you an interesting person, make you a nuanced person, those apply to your GMing. So listen to yourself, right? Remember, role-playing games are just socializing with rules, and your usual mechanisms for coping and thriving in social situations are going to work in a game environment too. And I know you're feeling nervous now, but when you've run your first game and you're full of, oh my God, this is way easier than I thought energy, I hope you'll come back and share that experience. It's an absolute blast for me to celebrate a brand new GM. Congratulate them on having made it through that first session, tearing off the GMing Band-Aid. You're going to do great. I know you will. It's just a matter of jumping into it and doing the thing. And sometimes that can seem scary, but I believe in you. And I think deep down you believe in you too. So our next question is much more specific, like very specific, about a specific game and about how to interpret something in that game. But I think we can apply some of its advice to games more generally. So let's take a listen.
Hey Adam, my name's Michael. I go by Yater ODST in Twitch. I just had a quick question in regards to Age of Rebellion. I'm running a campaign with a few friends of mine, and wanted to ask you about ways to properly utilize the advantage, threat, triumph, and despair system to create interesting levels of success and failure, and to also take those principles into other games such as Dungeon World or other games that have varying levels of success.
All right. So, this is a question that I've been working on answering myself. And before I start talking about my experiences, let's talk about the dice pool system in the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game. Okay? We'll break it down a little. So, in 2009, way back in the distant past of 2009, Fantasy Flight Games released a game called Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd Edition. And because they're Fantasy Flight, and they own a bunch of machinery to create weird little cardboard counters and like tiny playing cards and funny dice, they went a little bit bananas and put all that stuff, like just all of it, dumped it into Warhammer Fantasy RP 3rd Edition, right? And it is literally the fiddliest role-playing game I have ever played. There are so many little bits and pieces. And while all the cards and counters and markers and whatever, notepads and shit didn't really do it for me, the dice system is pretty cool. Having custom dice with non-numerical faces made the game feel like every roll was an interpretation of strange runecraft, right? What does it mean to have 2 hammers, a comet, and a skull in your final roll, right? You're casting bones in a very mystical feeling sort of way. And apparently, that was the part of the game that Fantasy Flight also enjoyed the most, because when Edge of the Empire came out, the dice system stuck around, but everything else kind of got pushed off into the game designer shame closet. So, in Edge of the Empire, you assemble a dice pool based on the one hand, the good stuff. So your innate abilities, your practiced skills, some bonus dice for luck or help. Each one represented by a different shape and color of die, right? Green, purple, yellow, D12s, D8s, D6s, right? And then you toss in, on the other hand, some dice for the bad stuff, the difficulty of the task, special disadvantages, that kind of thing. So you end up with a pool of dice, all these colorful oracles in your hand, and you throw the dice, and you assess the result. Good and bad stuff cancels each other out, and whatever you're left with is a mixed pool to interpret. So if you're looking for a more detailed assessment and analysis of the dice system for this, I did a short video with JP over on his YouTube channel to go through all the steps. So if you're curious about that, hit up ItMeJP on YouTube, find that video, check that out. Now, once you've got all that stuff on the table, you've got this mixed pool, this is where shit starts to get fun, right? So you might have a roll that is a fundamental success, but with a ton of threat, indicating the success comes at a high cost. You might fail the roll, but retain a certain degree of advantage, meaning you don't get the thing you want, but some other beneficial occurrence is there in the results. You might uncover a triumph or a despair. These are the crits or fumbles of that game. And they might appear alongside success or failure, advantage or threat. The whole thing comes together in a very oracular way. And the first few times you do this, it can be so daunting, especially if your GMing background doesn't contain games who are about mixed success. If you're not familiar with that, if you're familiar more with like you do it or you don't systems, this can be very intimidating because it's like being given a magic 8-ball that just says outlook not so good and being expected to make narrative sense out of it. Now, once you get the hang of it, it's incredibly flexible and totally rewarding, but the key is, I think, understanding and interrogating the fiction in play, right? It's about... I mean, okay, so for me, it's easier because I have so much experience with the Powered by the Apocalypse games, right? Because if you look at many of the roles in that game, they say, you get what you want, but something else bad might happen, and you have to pay for it. So, more often than not, Fantasy Flight Star Wars roles feel like a modified, more complex, or more nuanced 7 to 9 on a Defy Danger, or an Act Under Fire, or all of World of Dungeons, right? So, how do we turn 2 successes, a triumph, and 3 despair into something more interesting than just you got the thing you wanted, you take a couple of strain, and you get a terrible fumble, right? Something very bad happens. So the way to do this, for me, the way I do this, is we look at the fictional situation, right? We establish where the character is, what they're trying to do, what they're using to do it, evaluate the fiction, put that first, and then pull the burning wheel trick of asking, what is your intent before the roll is made? What does the player want out of the dice that are hitting the table? Establish, if you succeed, what will you get? Because then, when you hit the table with the dice, it makes success and failure really easy to understand. Success means they get the thing, failure means they don't get the thing. Pfft, done, easy, right? That puts success and failure nice, clear in front of you. Threat and advantage, they are a bit trickier because they represent things like passing momentum to another player, suffering stress, side effects of trying to get what you want, complication, right? You can leave advantage in a lot of ways to the player. Often players will ask you for help, but advantage is fundamentally on them to say, I want this, even though I don't get the thing I wanted, and hopefully it's related, right? Because setting up that idea of what you want out of the role will help you decide what advantage is. Because advantage is like, you get a thing that is like your intent, but not it. So you can leave advantage to the player to offer suggestions, but you can, if you have good ideas, give it to them too. If you're interrogating a prisoner, but you fail a roll, but you get advantage, this is when you start to play good cop, bad cop, right? So you can say, I'm shitty to the prisoner, and I'm mad and I'm angry, and then I turn around and I look at my friend, I look at the other Imperial interrogator, and I give him a wink, like, all right, go in there and play nice, right? So you pass them the dice. If you succeed, but you take some threat, right? You can narrate through why they take strain, right? Like the interrogation is running slow. You only have a limited time to get the information out of this person. You're feeling the pressure from high command to get this done. These are places where you can add complex precision to success or failure. Don't think of them as separate results inherently, but think of them as ways to move into the next roll, right? Say, you get this much advantage, who is next, and what do you do? This is a prompt for the next thing that might happen in the game. For me, and this is definitely the result of playing lots of Apocalypse World and Dungeon World, it's about asking the right questions and fitting answers to the mechanisms, or vice versa, right? It's about saying to the players, how do you create an opening for the next character, and interrogating the fiction together as a group. Getting collaborative about the results of the roll is what's going to help ease you out of relying too heavily on hitting mechanical stuff every time. I'm finding about at the time of this recording, about 4 episodes into each of the live Age of Rebellion games that I'm playing, the more able the players are to give input, the more they're going to want to learn the rules. And they're going to jump to the fore to say, oh, can I spend my advantage for this? Right? Like, there's nuance in the rule set because each role has some suggestions, each skill has some suggestions, and you can really see the sort of 7 to 9 space and the 13 plus space from Apocalypse World getting pushed into these kinds of games. We had a result recently where someone got a triumph on a charm roll, and the NPC, essentially, it was a 13 plus on a seduce and manipulate. Right? It was, they become your ally. I'm not going to use them against you, so I took my crosshairs off that character. But that's just me applying existing GM knowledge to Star Wars, right? Because they operate in some similar spaces. But sometimes it's okay just to hit the rules, just to say, okay, we're in combat, you take some strain, you're in a fight, you're feeling like tense, let's move on. It's one tool among many, just the same as dealing damage is one move among many the GM can make in Dungeon World. Basically, I think that this stuff applies equally to any game with a variable axis of interpreted results on a roll. The best thing you can do is look at what's happening in the fiction and try to be as specific about it as possible. Use the characters and use the results of the fiction to tell you in this exact moment what is right, and often go with your first idea. Don't worry about getting the thing perfect. Barf your Apocalyptica or your Star Wars Liptica, and just move the thing forward. Carry momentum. Don't let it get hung up, because a single roll isn't going to fuck up your whole game just because you interpret it in a way you didn't like. Take a note in your mind and carry on, right? Think about what the scene would look like if it was in Star Wars or Mad Max or a fantasy adventure comic or whatever your milieu is, and use that. Interrogate the fiction. Go from there. Fiction first. Makes GMing so much easier. So sometimes our players, or the premise of our games, our situation, sometimes our situation ends up where the players are portraying untouchables in a way, right? Well, I'll let the asker of this question specify this one for me.
Hello, Adam. I hope this recording finds you well. My question to you is, as a GM, how do I handle PCs who hold a position that grants them authority, or more likely inordinate amounts of authority and respect? Imagine something like an Adeptus Arbites, or a witch hunter. Someone who the common folk fear and respect to sometimes ludicrous levels. I can't just take away their authority and strip their character of their identity, but I also can't have everyone bowing and scraping in their presence all the time. How can I keep things fresh and interesting when faced with such a PC? Thank you.
So this is a real specific one, right? Because it's about a certain kind of situation, right? We like the idea of playing characters that exist. I mean, okay, so thinking about this question, I was trying to think of a situation in which PCs in a game are not somehow set aside from society at large in some hierarchical way, right? Maybe you can help me understand, but I can't think of a game in which the player characters are not either shitty outsider pariahs, right? Like murderous other class adventurer types who the common folk fear and loathe, or above the common people, right? Demigods that walk the earth, cruel vampires who feed on the weak hordes of humans that surround them. We're beginning our lives sometimes as characters as one of those things, right? The shitty nobody, and we work our way up to godhood with enough experience, but we're never quite a part of the society that we are in. The characters have either more or less authority over their day-to-day lives than like the average kind of person in that setting. Think about authority in your favorite role-playing game, right? Are the characters inherently a part of their society, or are they somehow exempt from its rules and norms? Are they considered more or less important than the average person? Think about the ways the characters in that game are set aside from the rules or the norms of that society. Are they held to a higher standard? Are they expected to be paragons of virtue and grace? Or do they somehow avoid authority? Are they able to commit murder and create chaos without too much hard opposition from the structures of power around them? How much of that is inherent to the situation in the game, and how much of that comes from our need as game masters to continue the narrative of players despite the character's behavior, right? Why is it that more murder hobos are not in jail? Why are they all wandering around the countryside? Why, why do we not have our prison system full of murder hobos in Dungeons and Dragons? So the thing is, I think when we craft a situation to explore as GMs, we're functionally creating the nouns of the world, right? We're saying here are the places, the people, the literal spaces this game will occupy, but we're also establishing the status quo. We're building a baseline, and we say this is the way the world is before we introduce the chaos of player characters to the world, right? And part of our understanding the setting is understanding the ways that authority and power work in those settings. Because so often PCs are transgressors in some way, we have to understand that not just that the king commands the armies is responsible for peace in the countryside, and the high commander of the Golden Keep has 20,000 goodly men. We have to understand where their authority comes from and how it will react when it's challenged, because that's what PCs will do. We need to think about these things because power and structures and the operative norms of the universe are inherently opposed to the idea of a player character. Player characters, either by design or behavior, become exempt from the world's status quo. They are agents of chaos. They're agents of change, whether they're lawful or chaotic, right? I don't mean chaos in the game sense. I mean chaos in they create change as they move through the world. Because, as we said before, without PCs, all we have is a static universe. We can invent a history for that universe, but history is not change. Change happens in the narrative. And the reason for this is built into the narrative of every role-playing game that we play. Without PCs, there's no game. Without a game, there's no change. Setting and situation is static, so by definition, the arrival and action of the PCs is really going to fuck everything up, right? That's just sort of how it works. That's how role-playing games work. But sometimes, to take it back to the question, sometimes we end up in a situation in which the PCs represent that authority, right? They are the cops, or the city guard, or the enforcers of peace. They are agents of what they perceive to be the status quo. And so this setup, paired with the idea that PCs will, when given the opportunity, act as a destabilizer to what currently exists, creates dissonance. The situation demands one thing, and actual play demands another. So the first step in managing this stuff is sitting down with the players before the game starts and establishing what the situation of the game is going to be about. It's about having a conversation that frames up your concept as a GM for the game, right? This game is about struggling with corruption in a failing police precinct. So it's probably okay for the cops in this game to have like drug problems and ties to the mob and to do bad things in the pursuit of their own personal goals by way of justice, right? That flows with the situation. Corrupt cops flow with the situation. There's change. We perceive the status quo as being opposed to the norm, but still you have that element of, like, people are probably afraid of them, and people give them respect simply because of the uniform, that kind of stuff. But if the situation in the game is about paladins, the last true paladins, in a world of black and white morality, part of that concept is that the paladins are true with a capital T, and going grimdark with these paladins is not in line with the original premise. This is the Pendragon situation. Pendragon is very much about playing the representation of the status quo, and to successfully play Pendragon, you have to go along with the flow to some degree. That game does not handle well if the characters all decide, you know what, fuck King Arthur, fuck Merlin, we are going to take the Excaliburs for ourselves, and we're going to murder Merlin, and we're going to kidnap Guinevere, and we're going to go to France. I mean, I guess there wasn't a France then. We're going to go to Germania? Anyway, you can't really do that in that game. Talking to the players about the authority their characters have in the setting, giving them information about the ramifications for violating the trust that they were granted in that setting and in that authority, and let them know if they're gonna go full murder hobo, this is what's going to happen, and this is the degree to which you are going to fuck up the game, right? And we can all buy in. We can all say, okay, we're not gonna leave for Normandy. We're going to stay in Britannia, and we're going to play knights, and we're going to do this thing because we've all agreed to it. And if you feel, as a player or a GM, if you feel like you're suffering a little bit from being censored, or you're like having your character ideas like boxed in, remember that every role-playing game does this to some degree or another. In Dungeons and Dragons, you probably can't get away with playing a Klingon. Right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you let your players be Klingons. But to some degree or another, every game tells you what you are and aren't allowed to do. So go along with that and help your players buy in, because buy-in will prevent issues 9 times out of 10. If you say, we're all playing witch hunters and the common populace is afraid of you, use that. Like, okay, real example for me, not a generic example. I'm running a game of Fantasy Flight Star Wars in which the characters are Imperials. They have a massive amount of authority. The average person on an Imperial-controlled planet will defer to them almost all the time. And before we started playing, I talked to them. I said, this is the game. This are the things that you can do. This is your authority. And they made characters for whom the idea of defecting from the Empire and doing their own thing and becoming space bandits is not part of the game concept. So this is a thing that we did in advance. We talked about this, and that's just how that goes. So to more specifically address the question that you're having, right? It sounds like you're looking for ways to challenge characters who have the full or mostly full weight of power structure behind them. They are carrying the authority of the status quo despite being changers of that quo, and that stuff gets pulled into the game. So you're looking for ways to challenge them. So you kind of want to play a game of balance, right? And what you do using the NPCs, using the people of the world, is you tell the characters how much they can get away with. Think about the ways that people respond to power. Think about the way you personally in your life, day to day, respond to power, right? You're walking down the street and a police officer is just walking towards you, right? They obviously want to talk to you. Think about how you react to that attention. If they stop you and they say, hey, where are you going today? What are you doing? What's in the bag? Right? They start to ask you questions. Think about how you respond to power. They have a baton. They have tear gas. Maybe they have a gun. How do you respond to that? In this case, most of the time, we're the commoners of the setting of the universe. So most of the time, and let's yank it back to a fantasy world. Let's make it a little less real. Living in a world where commoners farm the land and toil for their lord, who lives in a castle on the hill, they tithe their money to the church, who keep nothing for themselves and are told what to do by the king and the knights of the king and the church. Think about all that stuff that these characters have. They're going to have conflicting feelings about the people that lord that authority over them. They may love the knight for saving their village. They may adore the priestess who blesses their wedding, but they might feel bitter that the king takes all their money and gives them nothing in return. Right? They might want a different sort of world. They might feel good about the structures of power, but they might fear the implements of that power. And there are subtle ways to show a response to authority, right? Like, if you show a player who has the fullest authority in the setting, if you show them someone disrespectful, they're probably just going to shoot them in the face, right? So, like, if, let's say someone, I don't know, let's say Otto Matine, let's say Otto the Imperial, is walking down the street, and some rebel walks up and says, "Die, Imperial scum," and spits in Otto's face, probably Otto will just shoot him in the chest and he's dead, right? He has that authority. No one will call him on it, but it's a representation of a change in power, right? It's a show of force. You want to play the Dungeon World game here and show signs of impending danger every time these things happen, right? Not every frustrated peasant is going to do the spit in the face or draw the gun or attempt assassination, but you can show them a response to the way they handle their power gently over time. So if the PCs start off treating their lessers with grace and respect, when the bitterness comes, it might be that the NPCs want to talk it out. If they treat them like shit, then the signs of revolution might be more hidden and sudden and come up from nowhere, right? Look at the way that they treat people who are lesser than them and think about the ways that not only those individuals will react, because individuals tend to react to authority with fear. Think about how the group, when not being perceived, will respond to power overall. A single person might be polite to a fascist with a gun, but a society at large might reject armed fascism outright because they're a group. So fear and respect of people in power is a tolerable condition for most folks, right? If they see no opportunity to remove it, they suffer because they believe the benefits they get are worth the misery, and are told that, right? The corporations tell us, keep buying our products, keep paying for the trappings of capitalism, and you can ignore the dystopia that's building, right? You can ignore the fact that the cyberpunk darkness is fast encroaching, right? Keep giving your money to the king because, you know, it's insurance for when the bandits show up, so I can pay my knights to go and kill the bad guys for you, right? Most of the time, people will play along because it's much more frightening to say no. To fight back, and because most of the time we don't have the tools to fight back against these power structures. So again, in terms of a game, most NPCs are not going to risk their lives to talk shit to a PC with authority. It doesn't mean you have to take away their authority, but you can give the characters lots of opportunity to challenge them. And one way you can do that is to give them an alternative, right? If they're on an Imperial planet, put some kindly New Republic doctors on the planet. Put some characters who are friendly to the PC's underlings and treat them better, right? Give them a folk hero who demands personal freedom. Give them a pagan priest who decries the suffering rules of the church, right? Like, give them someone else to listen to, an alternate authority, because people like alternatives. Make the PCs earn the respect of the leaders of their community. Meet cruelty with anger, but more often with capitulation. And give them foes, both clear and hidden. Obvious revolutionaries, and then also the slow degradation of their power structures if they abuse them. Another really cruel trick that you can pull on your PCs when they're like witch hunters or inquisitors or whatever, give them a few sessions to like exert their authority, and then show them someone they actually care about who's having a crisis of faith that demands punishment, right? Do the burning wheel thing where you're like, oh, all heretics must burn forever? Well, your younger sister was caught with a copy of the Forbidden Doctrines. What are you going to do? You can go throw her in a fire, right? And characters will, as a result of their players' priorities, they will double down or they will question their beliefs. And this is how a game about characters in authority becomes a game about characters questioning authority. So that's a thing you can do. Honestly, I suppose the ultimate thing, and why I find the idea of like, I don't know, playing a Space Marine so silly, is that Space Marines don't give a fuck about anything except murder and explosions. Right? If your PCs are just murder machines, the game will get boring very fast because they have authority. The people that reject their authority get blown up. repeat ad nauseum, right? Spin cycle forever. But if your PCs are humans first and Inquisitors second, they're going to care about more than just instantly jumping to the destroy the heretic point. And where that falls, and now, because of that Apocalypse World game, that I ran on Roll20, all I can think about when I think about that gentle push that GMs do sometimes to be like, well, what if now? What if now? What if now? All I can think of is Navarre, right? Navarre is probably the most stick to her guns, if you'll pardon the pun, which you shouldn't. She's the most stick to your guns PC I've ever encountered, because every time I was like, yeah, but what about will you grenade launcher this person? What about these people? And every time the answer was yes. And that's fine to me, right? Like, that's just how it goes. Sometimes characters will just keep doubling down, and that's okay. That's them learning about their character. I think the most interesting thing you can do, instead of trying to deflate their authority or undermine it, which you can do in both cases, the most interesting thing you can do is put them in conflict with their own authority. Right? Force that question. What about now? What are you going to do when? Now what? The slow boil, the hard choices. Let them question the authority for you, right? Because it's all fun in games to play the like high samurai who's allowed to just cut off anyone's head for looking him in the eye, but that gets boring fast, and what players want is a challenge. So challenge them by getting them to question where they're at in that space. And if you really want to like get into it, read some books about actual revolutions. Read articles about the nature of power and authority. Get into it. Read about passive resistance. See how historical rebellions and civil wars got started and how they've played out and why they started, right? Like, somebody got pissed off enough to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand, spread that around, and then somebody did it, right? They found someone or someone's in the Black Hand crazy enough to pull the job off. So nothing is weirder or more inspiring for a role-playing game than like shit that happened in real life. So, I don't know, go to Wikipedia, look up famous rebellions, see how those worked. Some of them went great. Some of them, not so much. French Revolution, looking at you. You big mess. Take inspiration from history, because history is cool. So that'll do her for today. Those are our 3 questions. I hope that for the people who asked them, that this advice has been useful, and for the folks that are merely observing my answers to those questions, I hope it's been useful and interesting to you as well. I am glad that you came to hang out, and we will see you next time, episode 14 of Office Hours. If you want to get involved, go to the website, www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. Submit your questions, and hopefully I can answer them for you on a future episode. See you next time, everybody.